carry on? Let's go. Welcome to another episode of the OoruLabs podcast from Bengaluru. Ever complain how bad our cities are, how bad your commute is? You'll get to hear from people who are working to solve these problems in their own way. This is your weekly soapbox for urban sustainability. I'm Sathya Sankaran. I am joined today by Meera K of Urvani. She is an Ashoka Fellow and was earlier a Knight Fellow at the International Center for Journalists. She is passionate about cities, community media, urban issues, local governance, and civic tech. She believes that the combination of in depth local journalism and community engagement helps catalyze better cities. And I don't disagree with that at all. We have spoken in our earlier episode with Rashid about newspapers and journalism as well, which is mainstream journalism. This time we will tackle citizen journalism as a breed, which Meera has been doing for a decade now with Citizen Matters, which is an online news platform. Welcome to the show, Meera.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So let's jump in with the big question I have. Does citizen journalism have a future? And before you answer that, maybe you can help explain to our viewers what citizen journalism is and how it is different from what we consider as mainstream journalism.
Citizen journalism is nothing but ordinary people doing journalism, right?
Hmm.
And typically they write about what they know, what they have observed in public life. And typically, again, it's about things that matter to them in on a daily basis, literally, right? And this works pretty well because people know what's happening in their own neighborhoods. And therefore, for them to share their observations, their experiences makes sense. And they know it better than any reporter parachuting down into their little neighborhood, right? So that is a pretty useful thing to share. So not just the rest of the city, but their own neighborhood gets to know what's going on.
Does it really have a future? You've been doing it for a long time now. Do you see it taking off? Do you actually see that it will survive? What are the challenges you've seen in the last decade of you doing this thing?
If you ask about media per se, there are huge challenges, right? I mean, globally, this is something, every journalism conference you go to, there's a lot of hand wringing saying, journalism is in crisis, what is the future of media, etc. So there are huge challenges everywhere. But from a citizen journalism perspective, I think there will always be a need, right? A lot of people from mainstream media kind of are a little ambiguous about citizen journalism. Some of them actually look down on it. But I see it as a very good complement to what professional journalists do. Okay, you can call them citizen journalists, you can call them citizen contributors, storytellers, whatever you call it. But people have something to share. They have their stories. And also the fact that there are always more stories than there are going to be reporters, right? Every city, or in general the number of media newsrooms that they are in any space, there is so much happening in our cities or in our states or even in the country, right? How do you really capture those? And for every development there is always an audience for it. There are people who care about these issues, and how do you do justice to those stories? I think citizens contributing, sharing their stories really makes a difference, and it's a good complement to what professionals do. You need professionals to go hold the governments accountable, to go cover larger issues, whether it's a defense deal or something on foreign policy. All of that is fine. But I think at the local level, citizens have a lot to share, right? Not just in terms of their experience observation, but also in terms of their knowledge, because a lot of people, like you've seen in Bangalore in the last decade or so, people have gotten involved in local issues. They have learned, they volunteer to, revive lakes. They have gotten involved in waste segregation activities. So slowly they've kind of built up that understanding and that knowledge of that space. So that domain knowledge is something, it's quite deep with active citizens, and they really are able to kind of add substance to those reports or articles, or and it can be any format, right? It can be a video story, it can be a talk, it can be a solid report or an opinion piece or a guide. And explainers do very well because people have kind of gone through the process, and a lot of things in our country need somebody who has gone through the process to explain it, right? Whether it's something as simple as, let's say, getting a driver's license, right? If you have to write an article or an explainer on making that happen, you have to go through the process, right? Otherwise, you would look at what's there on this website and you would say, oh, this is the process. You fill this form. You have to give these additional documentation and you're done. But only when you go there, fill the form, then they'll say, oh, we need 3 copies of this. Or you got your doctor's certificate, then they'll say, oh, it has to be an empaneled government doctor. All of these, the fine print is something only when you go there you'll understand. So it really makes sense for asking people to share their experiences and write these articles because it's helping so many others in our cities, right? So
But
yeah, definitely, I think citizen journalism is very critical. It is critical now, and it is going to be critical going forward.
so then, does this become a separate category? Like you said, the mainstream media might not necessarily think this is a part of journalism. It requires certain specific skills. You need skills. You need to tell both sides of the story. But an opinion piece, or not, I don't know what you call it. I'd still call it citizen journalism. But even if you call it citizen storytelling or experiential learning, or say
Yeah,
telling
yeah.
the experiential story, does it require a bunch of skills? And what have you seen? Is everybody able to tell a story? I have been fortunate enough to contribute to Citizen Matters some time ago during all of the campaigns that I used to run. I think once in a while I have shared, some of the friends I know have shared articles onto Citizen Matters as to what are our experiential learnings. And I have received guidance from you and your team as to write about how you felt doing certain things, kind of, right? But can everybody tell a story? Is it possible that people who have the experiences who are not able to tell the story might be excluded from these kind of platforms? What have you seen?
See, in the beginning, when we started opening it up to, you know, lay citizens to start sharing their experiences or their stories, many of those submissions would be like letters to editor, a lot of complaints or, very opinionated points saying, this particular development is not good. It's going to make things worse, blah, blah, blah. Right. And to go from that letters to editor kind of format to a proper article takes some time and effort, right? Some people are born storytellers. You, Satya, you were always a good writer. Uh, so that when you have submissions like that, then it makes it easier. But even otherwise, it's about this entire process of facilitating that storytelling. You engage with them, you mentor them to write and put together all the points. There's a lot of back and forth. So this editorial stewardship is very critical. You can't just have, like, if somebody just sends in a piece, you can't just put it. They might as well put it in their blog, right? So when you put it onto a media platform, that means it's gone through. There's a certain rigor and due diligence that have to be done. You have to cross check the facts. You have to verify some of these points. You have to refer and do your own reading up to understand what they're talking about, right? And typically we're very careful about, we don't allow people to, with very specific agendas and say, oh, this is going wrong, or they're complaining about somebody. That's not something we are really looking at. We want people to look at larger issues, looking at, from a systems perspective, understand the issue. If somebody comes with a complaint, then we ask them, okay, why is this problem happening? What do you see as a solution? Have you tried raising this issue with your local official or who's been in charge? What was their response? So that back and forth, it takes effort, and that's what develops into a solid story.
But you've seen at at Citizen Matters, some of the stories from Bangalore. You've been here for
Mm.
a long time, but you now, I think you're in Chennai and Mumbai as well, right? You have where?
And we have covered a few other cities as well, Pune and
Yeah.
Hyderabad. A lot of N2 citizens from there who actually contribute on their own. Yeah.
Right, right. So I've read some from the other cities as well. But how do you see this being different? Of course, being where you are, you got more entries. But do you
Mm.
see a difference in how people want to participate in telling their story, or is it universal? Is it that people want to write everywhere about things anyway? It doesn't matter which city you are from. Do you see any geographical differences in how people contribute to you in the limited number of cities you have received contributions from?
Good question. I don't know if it is geographical, but I think there is a sort of a cultural and active citizenry maturity model, if I can call it that. Okay, I
Hmm.
just cooked up that word. But
Hmm.
broadly, if you see, I think like a lot of people from outside Bangalore, when they come here, they get, very impressed. Oh, you have such active groups, and they engage in so many different initiatives. They're involved in lakes and waste and mobility. we kind of, in a way, Bangalore leads the way, right? And but you also see it happening slowly in other cities. So that curve, for example, getting involved in issues, Bangalore's probably ahead of that curve. And I think it sort of started one because, we grew like boom, in the 2006, 7, 8, right? From 6 million into whatever, 9 million. Suddenly, not just about, expanding the boundaries of the city, but also there were like a lot more people migrating into the city for tech jobs and so on. So that made a huge difference. And that also, there was things, there were the rate of things breaking down increased, right? Traffic became really bad. There was garbage all over the place, and water problem became a big thing, and so on. Literally, people were talking about Bangalore run out of water and all that, right? So all of that really kind of caught attention. That was one. On the other hand, you also had that was sort of like the growth or the of social media, right? People started engaging. There was Facebook, and people started connecting with people in their own neighborhoods. So it was actually a very vibrant time. The early days of social media actually was very useful, very powerful in connecting people together. And as at Citizen Matter, we also kind of benefited from that. We had people kind of learning from each other, getting together to start solving issues. They found it easier to find volunteers. So things were happening, and each of those, whenever things happen, there are stories around it. And people were, when they got involved, they were also trying to learn. They were finding out, who is in charge, what can I do about it, how can I be more sustainable, how can I do rainwater harvesting. There was a lot of searching online, and then they kind of landed up on Citizen Matters. So our explainers, our stories could help people get started on this journey. And as they started doing those things, their step by step, their road to success, so to say, also kind of got converted into stories again, right? And their learnings, they documented, and they kind of shared it back with others as articles. So it was a nice feedback loop, and it really was. I think between 2011 to 2018 was sort of like the peak time for Bangalore. And I think other cities are at different levels in the curve. You see it happening definitely in many other cities. Chennai now is like getting much more vibrant. Pune and Hyderabad have always had a lot of enthusiastic citizens. Gurgaon, for example, you will find like people getting engaged, right? So I think it's also the curve where people are engaged, they are networked, and they're also younger and have a different way of looking at things, right? They're new to public policy, new to the public space. They're not so used to that, the old politics going down to, typically, if you remember like a RWA from 20 years ago, and it would comprise of older people and typically men, and they would trudge down to the local MLA's office or the councillor's office and say, "Sir, this is happening. Can you do something about it?" Petitions. That mindset was, and that approach was very different. So here you're connected, and you started demand change. Your expectations are higher. You want things to be better because you've seen it being better and elsewhere. You kind of question saying, why should our city be broken? So I think that really makes a difference, right? How you approach, how you look at these issues, what is your relationship with the city make a big difference.
And I think that link with the city is a very nice thing that I found in citizen journalism, that lets you express your lived experience into thoughts. But let me ask you this: you have never been in print, or you started online, right? I mean, I couldn't say never. I think you had some print. No, you never had print.
So no, we started online because both Subbu and I had a tech background, and it was just by default it was easy to get going. We did have a print edition. We had print editions they were hyperlocal editions at looking at two neighborhoods. The first one looked at BTM, JP Nagar, Jayanagar, and the next one looked at Kurumangala and HSR. So for about 3.5 years we were publishing, but it
Hmm.
was a very logistics intensive
Intensive.
operation.
So
Yeah.
why did you get out of print? Do you think it has let's understand, why did you get out of print?
I think print would have worked maybe if he had started 5 years earlier. I think it was sort of when people started kind of disconnecting from a print model, people were going online, right? We did have an audience, but was it an audience ready to pay and cover the cost of printing a magazine, doing all the journalism was hard to say, right? So I think that to kind of cover the cost and find a business model that worked was not easy. While it was received initially, in fact, when and we took a magazine long form article model where people were actually didn't realize there was so much to read and so much happening in their own neighborhoods, right? We talked about this JP Nagar flyover happening, taking forever. And initially, I think we had about 1,500 words, and people were like, my God, saying, okay, this is this complex, right? This issue. Who was the contractor? Why did it get delayed? What happened to the payment? How much did it cost? All of that was very new to people living right there, on that road. So I think that, exposure to saying local is something that is actually very complex. It's as complex as any issue at a state level or a national level is something that was new to people. So it took some time for people to get used to it. But I think they really picked it up well. They started enjoying their, fortnightly. So we had solid hard stories. We also had a lot of local culture, art, sports, all of that, reviews, theater reviews, and so on. So it did well from a reader perspective, but to again, like to cover the cost of that was hard because local, it was an advertiser driven model, right? And local advertisers have different expectations. They're not looking to build their brand. They want to say, okay, I put my ad, and therefore, an ice cream shop puts their ad. They want to know how many ice creams they sold in the afternoon, right? By evening. So unless you're actually, there's a return on their investment, right? They've spent whatever, $500 or $1,000 on the ad, and they need to sell another, like at least 20 ice creams more than they did earlier. So that is a very different mindset, and period of point, I think it was really difficult. I think we still could have scaled up and amortized the cost, and we had a lot of editions, but again, they provide a lot of investment. And I think by the time people were saying, okay, media was not really something investors were looking at. All of these other media like scroll and all that started much later. So when we were looking at the early stages, it was very different.
I do feel that local news is something that is missing right now, and hence there is a lack of connection between the local people towards the issues in their neighborhood. While each one sees what's happening on the main road at the corner, the news only talks about Ukraine. And there is no vent, there is no source of who do they ask? They just ask their neighbors what's going on that main road. It seems to be always dug up. And it's information that you don't have any access to. Because at that level, the news media cannot cover. But at some point, you are not the traditional news media. You don't have breaking news. You're always analytics. You're always citizens voices. At you can try to be contemporary, but you're not breaking news. So you're not shoving a mic in someone's face as it is happening. You are not possibly covering crime. I have never seen crime being covered on Citizen Matter. What does that mean to you, not being a traditional news media and not being in the constant cycle of, oh, look, the pothole just appeared. Let's go and shove a mic in that guy's face when it is, when the thing is.
Yeah, yeah.
What is this deferred news cycle going to do to something like that?
So before I get into the deferred news cycle and not doing breaking news, let me talk about fundamentally, historically, we have had very little local news. How
Hmm.
many local newspapers do you see? Even in those papers, how much of local news do you really see? Do you see how often do you see something that's happened in your own neighborhood? Our cities are huge, yeah. Like even in small towns, right? Do they have local? Very rarely do you find local papers. And I think in the 90s and like early 2000 and all, you did find all these, Jayanagar this week or Adyar
Hmm.
Times. All of that is some
Hmm.
of it
Hmm.
still continues, but many of them have shut shop, right? But broadly, how much of solid journalism did they have, right? They were like more community news. Oh, this, school had this annual day, sort of easy. So when you're doing solid reporting, right, at the local level, one is this cost, right? There is journalistic effort going in. It's a lot of effort. Somebody has to cover the cost. And historically, we have never had, paid attention to local news like elsewhere, like in many other countries, especially Western countries. A small town with 50,000 people will have its own newspaper, right? Do we have, I don't know, a Rajaji Nagar Times, right? I think there have been attempts,
There are a few.
on and off, yeah, but
Yeah.
on a sustained way,
No.
like for years and years, has any media really covered that? No, because there is effort in doing it, and we somehow don't have that sort of like an ad model or any other business model that will cover the cost. And this lack of local news has had serious repercussions. Okay, this is my very personal opinion, but I feel very strongly about it. Earlier, people knew each other, right? You knew your neighbors.
Hmm.
These are older neighborhoods. That was okay. But as the city grew, you didn't know too many of your neighbors, right? There were
Hmm.
new people coming all the time, especially in the flats and apartments. It was a very different culture. So how do you even find out what was that community glue if you didn't have a shared view of what's happening in your community? What connects you with people, right? And what gives you that sense of ownership to your own neighborhood, to your own city? So this lack of coverage has resulted in, I think, many people not really having the sense of connect with their cities. And we've got to this point, we have not been questioning like, why is the road so bad, or why is there, corruption when you try to mm, register your property. All of these things have been because we've just accepted status quo. Oh, this is the way things are. Like, politicians are bad, officials are corrupt, right? We've just kind of not really, gotten involved and actually said, boss, this is not right. This cannot happen. And how do we actually change that status quo? Because local is where you can actually intervene. You cannot go do something as a lay person. We cannot go get involved in, like, let's say when a
Yeah.
major policy decision at the central level is happening, or when they are creating a new state, or all of those, right? But this is something that's happening literally, within a few kilometers, or in a space of a few square kilometers. We have access to it. We have we can have control by going and getting involved, but we don't do that. And this lack of coverage, I think, has fed into this disconnect.
I don't disagree because that also says, again, like I said, you don't have access to information in your local neighborhood. You either
Hmm.
rely on WhatsApp forwards or there's
Yeah.
no proper discussion. And then you start connecting only to the things you see in the newspaper. And at that scale, city newspapers,
Hmm.
state newspapers, they only start looking at this one page of city news. There's no sub city
Yeah.
news, there's no
Yeah.
area level news. But it also, I feel, at some point was because these were physical newspaper. This is why I talked about print. I
Hmm.
don't think
Hmm.
it'll be, you can find the ability to sustain a local newspaper. For an event, I go and ask to do an event in my neighborhood. People
Hmm.
come and say, what is, no, 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 you should at least do across the city. Your audience of this much is not enough for me. I already know my neighborhood. Why should I give you the money?
Hmm.
Unless it is a charitable donation that they would make to you. Uh, it's not ad funded. So the costs need to be low. And this is where it comes to the internet. But coming back to the breaking news, has that ever hampered your style?
It was a conscious choice. Initially, we were doing a lot more local reports, like, just plain bone reports. This happened, and this is, the literally, like, the who, what, where, why, that kind of a thing. But slowly, we kind of started taking a step back because nobody was doing it. To some
Hmm.
extent, in over time, in the last 15 years, we've seen the local newspapers and other media, even digital media, starting to pay more attention to local news. Still not enough hyperlocal coverage, right? Unless it's a group that is very vocal online on social media and they get their, people also know how to get their issues get covered in media, right? They're very savvy. But unless you're in that category, it's kind of hard. You don't really see much of coverage at a very hyperlocal level, but still city level news has kind of increased compared to earlier. Earlier, it was like occasional, like in your, page 3 or 4
Hmm.
somewhere, you'll say, oh, commissioner said this, they announced a new flyover because this, which is going to solve the traffic jam in this junction, right? Nobody questioned what happened to the plan you had like previous year, or what happened to this other underpass you've constructed or left half undone. Those questions never happened. There was no connecting the dots. There was no, follow ups, all of that. So there were just these little 200-word pieces. People were, that's typically what the media did those days. I still think there is value in doing breaking news at a local level. There is so much happening, but somebody has to do it and somebody has to pay for it. Who does that that's an open question. I think there is definitely a need. It is possible for the community to come together and have their own newsletters, definitely, and this is something we are happy to help with if somebody wants to do that. But as Citizen Matters, we kind of took a conscious choice saying, okay, there's really nobody looking at systemic issues because these are complex and we have the understanding and the ability to do this. Let's focus on this because this is more like a long term change, right? How do you actually fix the system? What, like, for example, something like decentralization or metropolitan planning committee or your UMTA, right? Mobility issues. All of these are something we've been talking about for very, very long time. And slowly these have become part of the mainstream discourse now. So it takes time, it takes effort over time to do that, and somebody has to do it. So we just took a call that, yes, this is something we want to focus on, because as we see more and more people getting involved, this is something you build a capacity in this pool of active citizens, and they are the ones who are going to solve problems, right? We have enough problems, we need more problem solvers, and these are the active citizens who are going to make a difference. They are the civic change makers. So that's been our sort of approach. You help them with the awareness, start getting into sort of, you show that things can change, they build their belief that yes, it's, this typical response, right? Oh, you can't have cycle lane in, India. That can happen in Netherlands and all. We are not like that. It took few examples to actually show that yes, it can happen in India, right? So that belief in change making is something we have to work very consciously and develop in people. So it's not just about awareness saying it's possible or these are the issues, these are the solutions, but you have to build that belief. Then you build that agency, that inclination to act, to and that ability to understand issue, to get involved and be willing to say, okay, I will put my time energy into solving some problems. That agency is very critical. Then only you kind of get to action. So there is quite a bit of that, that cycle that we've been seeing happening, and it's a very involved process.
I want to get to the involvement of, it's not just news and it's not just reporting. There's a lot of involvement with the activity itself that you have been
Mm,
a part of. Before that, let's touch upon this issue of online versus print and these kind of
mm,
things, right? Uh, a JP Nagar Matters or a Sanjay Nagar Matters kind of a sub portal would be far more applicable today than it
yeah.
were in the print media age, because of the proliferation of Instagram and whatever it is now, X, what is it called now? Yeah, that's what it is, and things like that, the social media age. Now some of the newspapers have chosen to go behind a paywall to be able to sustain, but there is also multimedia that is coming up. Some of us may not necessarily be comfortable enough to write an article of whatever number of words. Some may choose to
Mm,
do just kind of go and do a video shoot. And now
yeah.
social media also is very forgiving in that I can shoot it any which way with a phone
Mm,
camera and it is
mm.
still okay. In all of these dynamisms, what do you see is, how do you make a JP Nagar Matters come alive on the internet age? What does it take to do something like that?
Talking about social media, yes, you see, whether it is a, HRBR layout or Whitefield Rising. There are many, many of these groups online, right? To some extent, yes, these are groups that are sharing updates, definitely talking about issues that they are facing. But social media is very ephemeral, right? Like they used to say, newspaper, today's newspaper is becomes tomorrow's, chapati liner or whatever. So social media is not even that. It's gone into one black hole. Who's going to go and see, last week's tweet or Facebook post or something? It's just gone down the sink. So there's just no way to really track it. So I think there is a need for to really have a memory of these developments. When I go back and read the articles from 10 years ago on, I still remember the first article when we wrote about Kaikonrali Lake getting rejuvenated. They had the JCPs. We have pictures of that. All the water was like, let out. You could see the lake bed, and they were actually digging, putting all these stone pictures. It's historical because that was one of the earliest lakes to get saved. And from that point, so many other lakes also have gotten, rejuvenated, right? These are developments which can be captured. We need mediums to capture all this information. It can't just happen on social media. Okay, if you want a hyper local news platform like, let's say, JP Nagar Matters, one, and I'm assuming you're talking about making it online, right? So having a pool of contributors, because it's hard for a reporter coming from elsewhere to come and do it, but I think a combination of reporters with some local contributors can make it happen. Okay, in theory, it's not like a big deal. Once you have this platform up, whether it's a website or a newsletter or whatever it is, how do you build that culture of consuming information, that
Hmm.
interest in community, which is, I think, in the last few years, one, social media has kind of become so distracting that everybody is so obsessed with this politics, national news, what's the rant of the day, literally, right? So that's sort of become very distracting and it's taken away everybody's attention from really important stuff, right? Nobody pays enough attention to the jam because they're just so used to it. Yes, traffic jam is going to be like that, rather than, what did so and so say or things like that. So I think that we have to figure out a way to wean ourselves away from all these distractions. Social media is also going through these flux. People are, it's like, I read in some article, it's become more media than social, right? There are no conversations. People are just coming to come and post and make a point.
Hmm.
We have to bring back that idea of having conversations, community conversation, as well as sparing time for community, right? Everybody is just so involved in, initially it was, office work, you know, family and so on, right? And people started taking out time to volunteer and all that. Now we have this, especially post pandemic, Netflix is, or, Amazon Prime have taken over attention, right? People are kind of getting distracted by a lot of things to kind of get back into the loop and say, okay, whether, even if you are big cities, we are still composed of small communities, paying attention to it, coming back into volunteering, whether it is for your own um, RWA or for a local waste management initiative or a lake or whatever it is, right? There are so many things you can do. uh, People used to volunteer for, in the local government schools to go teach English, maths, and all of that actually, I believe, has reduced. And I'm hearing this from a lot of volunteers. So there is, initially I thought maybe it is just the post-pandemic exhaustion, but people are kind of stepping back and disconnecting from engagement uh, because of all of these distractions. Plus, maybe there is this frustration that things are not changing fast enough for whatever reason. So I think we have to get back into that, create that culture of getting involved and becoming more positive. Yes, things can change because without that, it's just going to be one cynical, okay, climate change is going to be there. Yes, it's happening, and things can't get worse kind of a mindset, right? I don't know where do we start there?
Well, you already started that, and I just want to deepen that conversation. The disengagement I see has kind of it's I don't know. Is there a peak? Is there a activism peak that has happened already? And it's not necessary we brand it activism. It is just caring for your neighborhood, and even you care for your neighborhood, things start getting better because everybody else knows that you care for your neighborhood, and you'll only care for it when you show up at certain events or at certain
Yeah,
gatherings which are not being convened now. And activism events like lake cleaning or plant tree planting or cleaning up your place used to be a very positive way of engaging the community.
yeah,
Even if you know that the waste will come back there, you met 20 people there who you had some discussions with, you bonded over, and then you said, look, there are at least 20 others who care like me. And that was a
yeah,
useful way of engaging. Now, if let's say there was this neighborhood matters kind of a newsletter that also gave you the history geography of the cleaning. 15 cleanings have happened now, and this is the 16th cleaning. Is something going to change? And everybody chimes in and say, hey, look, we've been having 20, 30, 40, 50 people coming and cleaning it up. Now it's better we do something about it so that we don't have to keep meeting over a street cleaning event. Maybe we can go and try a lake some other time or have a cycle day instead.
yeah,
There is a nice way to tie what you call as the citizen journalism and the activation at the activity events. I have also, like you, seen probably a dip or a fall in activism. How critical is that for you? You have seen a lot of this. Have you seen it continually dip? Is there any hope for it to come back up? Because without caring and, like you said, participation, it's not you who's going to write about Sanjay Nagar matters, right? It's going to be somebody in Sanjay Nagar who's going to write about Sanjay Nagar matters. And where are those people? How do we bring them together? I also know you've been trying to conduct some kind of workshops for different types of things. What do you do in these workshops, and how do people respond to these kind of things? Do you tell them how to write? Do you teach them what to do? Is that a useful thing to bond over? What do you think?
So we've been doing what we call jams, like solutioning jams, data jams, and that's a pretty interesting and fun format to kind of engage and collaborate with people.
Hmm.
So as you know about Open City, it's the whole idea was to democratize data of India's cities, and primarily there is this data commons that we have the repository where we are sharing data related to cities, whether it is budgets or boundaries, jurisdictions, expenditure reports. Lot of it. There is so much of data related to cities which is not available in one place, and a lot of times, it's available and then it will disappear. So it kind of makes sense to have it at a place, in a common place, so that all of us who care about cities, who are working on it, can use it, right? Whether it is for advocacy or activism, or for journalism or researchers, or just lay citizens or RWAs trying to find out about some works happening in their area. Its data is very, very useful, right? So that's a data commons. Then what we've started doing is bringing people together. We come together on one Saturday and take up a theme and say, here is all the data and information we know about this topic. Let's go dive in, analyze it, find patterns, see what data is telling us, and perhaps identify some of these problems and propose solutions as well. So it's a very constructive way of engaging. You're not just complaining, but you're trying to make sense of where things are, what the current status is, what are the possibilities of going forward. So it's been very, very interesting, and we've done a few sessions after the pandemic. We've restarted, so we've done about 3 4 of these jams. We've looked at uh, looking at education, health, and other parameters in constituencies. We have looked at mobility issues, looking at metro, bus, cycling, and other kind of data, and seeing people picked up different problem statements. For example, one group looked at how do you solve last mile connectivity in this X neighborhood, right? And this is a very useful when you kind of bring people from different backgrounds, and they have multidisciplinary backgrounds. They are GIS experts, coders, ordinary like civic minded citizens from that area, researchers, visual designers. You have people with different skills coming and thinking through in a very blue sky manner, and it's very enjoyable that you're actually constructively engaging and doing something, having something come out of it. You have ways, ideas of how things can go forward, how problems can get solved, and you can go back to these communities and maybe make this happen. So the idea is to bring some of these ideas to public discourse as well, and that's what we've been doing. So that's working very well. So people are engaging, because I think after lockdown, people are also started enjoying meeting in person and engaging in a constructive way. So yes, that's another way we are bringing in people. So a lot of these engagement sessions, we have master classes, we have learning sessions, we have these community jams, data jams, and solutioning exercises. There are different ways we are engaging, bringing people together. So which is sort of like the complements the media and the journalism bit as well as the data bit. So yeah, that's sort of how we are trying to get people empowered, involved, and making a difference.
How have you seen the civil society come forward with the stories? That's the easiest part to do. Data can be for a bunch of uh, people like us who might just want to just meddle with the data. But at the end of this, informing with data is always, and then writing about it is always useful. And not everybody can do that. So
Mm-hmm.
there are these different aspects of citizen journalism where just people telling things is good.
Yeah.
Now you said that needs perseverance and memory, and you want to capture that for posterity somewhere. Tell the
Mm-hmm.
story and keep that stringing together. And there is a stewardship around that you provide. And there is this data
Yeah.
piece which is possibly going in, maybe done by a different set of people, and the
Mm-hmm.
sequencing of that might be useful. Again, coming back to in this age of the internet where people are sharing non-persistent stories, they come and go, fleeting. So there is a need to express. Social media has definitely brought that to the fore. Mm, my street having potholes, my street not flooding, whatever it is, right? At the local level is being reported. But when you throw it to the city, I find that the city responds in a macro way. Yeah, we'll solve flooding everywhere. And then you are just searching on Twitter space for somebody in the local to come and say, can you please point out the local guy to help me out here? By the time you solve the whole story, I may be dead. Achieving local kind of stories is kind of hard, right? I mean, you already mentioned that it requires a lot of resources and the communities need to come together. And unless there is a sense of activism in people and want to contribute kind of thing in people, you're not going to get those stories, and it's not physically possible for you to do all of those stories. So considering all of these things, the internet, the way people tell stories, and the data part and all of these things, if you synchronize these and say, from here where you've gone this far, where do you see all this going? Because both of us have spoken over why local stories are important, why local stories are useful to build local narratives and attention to details at the local level. And more people start now looking at decentralization of both finance and action and power and everything. Ward level this, ward level committee, that's also coming up. So I think we are moving to a maturity there. But where do you see that going, and what are the different steps you want to get done in order for citizens to participate at local neighborhood level content?
So to the question about, somebody trying to solve flooding at in your street versus uh, the city coming up with saying, hey, we have this huge project to solve, thousands of crores we have invested. We are going to get this, whatever, GCA loan, World Bank loan, fix all these problems. We're going to do everything types. Both are important in a way, right? One is, yes, your own problem may have a tactical solution at that point, which you have to kind of run around, work with your local, engineer to make that happen. But it's also important to understand that it's not just about a very localized problem. These are connected. This local problem may be just a symptom of a larger issue. It is, about the terrain. It is about the network of pipelines. It is about the process of how they build drains. Everything is messed up, right? And you have to have that big picture as well. And therefore, next time when when they decide the budget, or when they, put it in their manifesto that we will solve flooding problems, you know what questions to ask, what issues have to be in the election agenda. So unless some of these, all of these issues actually get into the agenda, we are not going to see any solution, right? Otherwise, they will just pay lip service, and then we will just, continue. It will be the same old people doing the same old things. I mean, parties may come, parties may go, but what's really changing on the ground? So I think you need to push for this. One, citizens have to set the direction. And having seen like the last, half a dozen elections at a local level, I don't, have so much faith that it's going to come from some leader or some hero coming to save all this. No, it has to come from us. It has to come from grassroots in terms of what sort of city we want, what is the direction we want to go into. If we want public transport, we have to demand it and make that happen. We have to make that into, get it into the agenda. Otherwise, things are not going to change, right? The question is, and I see this happening at some level, right? And like, again, different cities, different levels, different speed. My only question is it enough? Because at this point now, we know climate change is much more visible. We are talking about extreme weather events, right? This year we haven't had enough rains. What's going to happen to water? I mean, like 30-40% of the city is dependent on groundwater tankers and so on. How are we going to deal with it? We knew this will happen. We knew what's the amount of water available. You knew that El Nino is going to come, and we've still done nothing about it, right? The number of whatever structures which have implemented rainwater harvesting is still like it's not significant yet, right? It's not just rainwater harvesting, everything, right? Whether you're treating water, whether you're like recharging, so many things are there, and we have just been, people have been sitting it out. The government has been sitting it out, and we really have ourselves to blame. So question is, the pace of change and the pace of all the stuff that we are trying to do has to accelerate if we have to meet the challenges that the climate crisis is going to bring on this. We can talk about sustainability. Yes, Bangalore was leading when it comes to segregation and waste management, all of that. But it is still only 40% of your dry waste that is actually getting recycled. The rest of it has to go to cement kilns or wherever, right? So really, it is what we're doing is not enough. So what is going to give us that energy and that enthusiasm and that, like, to be really relentless, tenacious and resilient to continue day after day, week after week, to continue and make it happen before things get too bad is the question. Yeah.
What do you think will fix that apathy? Is there a crisis point? Is there a turning point? I mean, I'm not looking for a silver bullet. It's while the question seems like that, of course, we all have our own approaches to the problem solving. One of the things I am looking for from you is having being involved in activities at different areas in Bangalore in as a part of getting these stories. Mm, it's easy to be disappointed, but what do you think can tilt the wheels, not solve the problem, or accelerate some change making?
I hope to see more leadership from community level, right? I think that's very important and a necessary condition. Uh, Also, sort of mini crisis in our cities does bring people together, right? Whether it is Chennai floods or something else happening in Bangalore, that people do come together and get involved. The only problem is it kind of becomes short-lived, right? After a year, you kind of forget and move on, move back to your usual position. So, but we have to use these kind of events while one doesn't want any sort of crisis at all, but that is going to happen, and therefore we will see people coming together. How do we build on this momentum is up to the leadership, right? Who are the people involved in various issues and how we can actually see there's a lot of things happening even now, right? It's not like, people working on lakes have stopped or people working on bases. It's just happening. But it's just that it's not such a new thing that you don't find this every day in the newspapers. How do you make that visible? So we need to get everybody on board and say all of this happening. It's not just enough to put it in like some, and people are also kind of said, fine, I'm doing my bit. I'm working on, to solve the waste issues in my community. I don't want to get back to, get onto social media or, it's enough of that, guys, right? That's also there. They've kind of withdrawn as well. So we'll have to kind of encourage more people to share, but also in a way that, because you need new volunteers, you need to get new people on the board, right? And people who've been working on the space are also getting older, and you can't just keep continuing forever and ever. You need new blood, new ideas, new ways of tackling these issues. So I think that is important. How do we capture this moment? Things will happen. People will kind of start paying attention, but instead of them losing interest after a while, how do we build on that is something we all have to figure out. That's on a regular basis as well, right, in the next few years. But from a long-term perspective, we have to fix, how we bring up our children or what our children are learning, right? Do you have anything local in our schools, right? Civics is considered as one boring subject. You learn about parliament, you learn about assembly, you learn, all of that. Do we learn about, the third tier or the fourth tier? Can we have our, that every neighborhood or every street has some sort of RWA or something which can actually be like a semi-formal way to start, have a democratic forum at that level, right? You can't still, even if you talk about a what committee, you're still talking about 50,000 people, 1 lakh people, right? How do you, that's still quite a distance away. But within your RWO, when you have like 100 households and you have like you've elected some president, treasurer, secretary, and so on, can we create these semi-formal system more ubiquitous? Can every neighborhood have these kind of vibrant groups engage? And I think those are the questions we need to see.
So, is that an answer to the two things you pointed out? One is post pandemic, people are more addicted digitally and also don't have the patience to even consume this 1 hour podcast. They want it in 60 seconds. If they'll say, hey, 12 people are offering me 1 hour podcast, that's 12 hours gone. Well, so that's one.
TLDR.
Yeah, TLDR. Give me a TLDR. The other thing is also you said young blood.
Yeah.
Do you see young blood coming up at all? Because they don't seem to think activism is woke. I don't want to participate in anything that I have to clean up. Maybe somebody else will. What's going on
They'll
there?
find their own way. Maybe they're not going to do the lake cleanups or the segregation things that we started. They will find their own cool things to do. But I think so. I mean, it is their future. Imagine, and when they are going to be our age, what sort of cities are going to be there? What sort of world are we leaving them? They better get involved. The question is like, can we kind of introduce them in a way so they can, make sense of it early enough and have a balanced view of what is possible, how they can get involved. And yes, I think that's something we really don't do enough of. How do we engage with more people, with young people is something we have to figure out. Not just about curriculum, but beyond that, how do we get kids to start like being visible in the neighborhood? If they don't have a playground, they have to demand one. How do you bring that agency into young people?
Just to realize that the title should be not if citizen journalism is failed, but it
Hmm.
should be is your neighborhood, does your neighborhood matter at all? Because I think that's where we are going. And the way you put this is very essential, providing agency to a new generation of people and getting them involved and helping care about the issues in your neighborhood in a positive way, having access to data through data journalism and telling the stories in a nice way and aggregating them with memory and participating in group actions. These are very valuable tools as the future of citizenship itself. Instead of trying to just raise slogans and stand in a corner and hope it'll do that also has its place. But in a democracy, it also helps if you use the tools that are at your disposal and engage in a positive way. And it's been my attempt to bring people like you on to tell these stories. Looking forward to actually talking to you one more time and deep dive. I'll probably want to call you sometime and talk about how we can make neighborhood matters happen in some way and see how we can use that to catalyze, and hoping there is more support for these kind of platforms, so this doesn't have to be chasing money at any point in time, because that can just cue the whole effort, right?
Absolutely.
All right, so thanks for coming on the show, Meera. It's been wonderful having you. Looking forward to having you some other time. For the rest of you, do not forget to like, subscribe, and share. If you want to have more guests like Meera come and talk about issues of the city, because the city matters and your neighborhood does matter. Thank you very much. See you all next week. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.